Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So big news today across the country. McDonald's workers went on strike saying, look, the reality is we need to make a reasonable wage. We want $15 an hour for the start of minimum wage. And the important part, and I keep saying this, everyone says, no, we fight for 15. Yes, fight for 15 in a union. 15 is the floor. We want to do better than that. We want to sit down, negotiate for the wealth that our labor creates, and we get to share in that. All the workers I talk to every day, I say at the end of the day, you want the companies that you work for to be profitable so that you can sit down with them and demand more for yourself. And good on these workers for standing up for themselves. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on maybe a little bit on the strike of the day. Also some of the craziness that we're finally uncovering what happened down in Alabama. I've asked Max Berger to come talk with us. Max is the editorial director for the group More Perfect Union. They have been doing incredible reporting on labor issues across the country. Max, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for having us. We're always happy to come by.
So let's jump on the strike today. You had workers in a number of places out demanding, as they have for the last couple, I guess, since 2012, $15 an hour and a union.
Yeah, it's really amazing, honestly, seeing how far they've come. I remember when they started, and there were a lot of folks, even within the labor movement, I think, who were very skeptical of this kind of approach of more social movement oriented unionism, less, targeted at a specific work site or even industry, and really trying to push this narrative throughout the country and to change what people thought was politically possible. And I remember at the time, a lot of people thought that they were nuts for doing that the number was too high, that, this money was all a waste. And, it's pretty remarkable how much has shifted in a relatively short amount of time, where now, as you said, 15 is the floor is something that people in the Democratic Party are saying consistently. You have kind of the most mainstream politicians in the Democratic Party even agreeing to, by and large, it's kind of the standard demand at this point for Democrats, which is, enormously successful. And it's, we passed these ordinances in a whole bunch of cities and states. So, and I think looking at it in that kind of long-term perspective, it can't be seen as anything other than a huge, huge success for the movement. Obviously we've yet to win at a national level, and there's still many, many states and cities in which we haven't succeeded. And even, the implementation of 15 in a lot of places is a lot slower and longer than many of us would like for it to be. And, what 15 was in 2012 isn't what 15 is now. And, 15 is still low by historical standards in terms of what workers were making back in the late 60s, early 70s, in terms of, what minimum wage would be if it was pegged to inflation. So, we're still just in some ways in the early days of this movement. But yeah, I think it's really remarkable to think about all that's been accomplished in the last, 8 or so years. And I think, what we saw in California with it's slipping my mind, but the name of the bill that they, the bill that they're pushing there, where the fight for 15 is now starting to branch off into demands around workers' rights and moving almost to a kind of sectoral bargaining approach, which again, I know is very controversial within the labor movement, but the movement is growing and it is building, and so starting to branch off in a lot of new and interesting directions, which I think is a sign of strength.
Yeah. No, I remember back in, it was the fall of, late fall of 2012. We had a bunch of people on when it first started off, because there were really two centers. There was New York, where it was coming out of, and Chicago. There were a restaurant group out of Chicago, right, that they kind of folded together. And I remember at the time going, $15 an hour, you're never getting this. But I love the idea that you've put the goalposts far enough to where if you have to compromise, you're still going to be much better off. And I remember at the time saying, I love that. That's how you negotiate. That's how you do it. And look, as time has gone on, they've hardened that 15 where they're no longer negotiating off of that, because as you said, that was a much bigger ask in 2012 than it is in 2021.
Right. And, at this point, they've gotten, the movement has succeeded to such an extent that there are even some private employers that have met that demand without the kind of federal mandate, or even a mandate in, the state or city that they're operating in. Famously Amazon, was pushed to do it by Bernie and others. And so I think that's all really the result of the strength of the movement and the workers who've been leading it,
Yeah,
and their efforts.
but here's the thing. I go back and I look at Amazon work. I remember working that kind of a job back in the late '80s, and that wasn't a $15 an hour job. That was a $23 an hour job.
Oh, absolutely.
That was a much higher wage. So saying,
Right. Even now, I mean, compared to a lot of the other warehouse gigs that people are doing in those same areas, it's much lower, So it's not that 15 is some extraordinary feat, on the part of these companies, but I just mean to say that like that has been established as a floor now,
right?
For even, some of the biggest employers in the world, is a big deal. And, the companies realize now that they get some credit for having hit 15, which again, not to give them too much credit, but is a sign of strength of the movement of making that such a resonant demand.
Yeah, but Max, now you're talking about woke capitalism. We can't have woke capitalism. I don't know if you saw CNBC the other day, and I couldn't help but crack up when I saw we've now got woke capitalism going. What are you talking about? We still got greed mongers.
Capitalism as racist as possible. That's their thing. Yeah, I mean, I think, look, I don't want to celebrate any of these companies for having hit this bare minimum, but I think it says a lot about the strength of the movement that companies see it as a significant hurdle for them to get over. And it says a lot about the strength of the movement that companies are willing to do it.
Or I would go the other direction. They're doing it because they don't want that other half. Right. 15 in a union for me has always been the rallying cry. I know a lot of people are like, hey, fight for 15. Don't forget the other part, because that's the really important part. That's what gets you above that. That's what gets workers at Amazon to be able to sit down with a guy who's worth $1 gazillion and can buy a $500 million boat and say, we'd like better wages, hours, and conditions, and we demand it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And as you know, as well as anyone, so many of these fights really don't actually revolve around wages at the end of the day, but respect and dignity. That's the kind of thing that only a union can bring. And, even having a job with good wages doesn't necessarily guarantee those things if you don't have your coworkers who are going to stand by and fight with you.
Let's talk about that for a second, because they're now Amazon. We're now finding out a lot what was going on during the vote. Billboards in the bathrooms. They've hired, I guess they've admitted to 9 union busters that they brought in. All of the stuff that the lights, the mailbox, all of the stuff that they got away with. Walk me through some of the stuff that's going on right now around this.
In Staten Island, or in with the NLRB?
With the NLRB.
Yeah, I mean, you referred to most of it. I think the most galling thing that we learned was the mailbox, which has always been kind of an extraordinary, a lot of the things that we've mentioned here are things that happen in a lot of these union fights, right? As I'm sure you know and have covered, union busters, it's kind of de rigueur at this point. We expect that they're going to have these high paid folks. I will say it is kind of extraordinary that they brought on to Amazon one of the kind of more famous high profile union busters to be their head of I forget the fancy HR title they give to it, but basically like their internal union buster. So it's not just that they hire folks for these campaigns. We also learned that Dave Clark, who is a very high up Amazon employee, I believe he's like the head of HR, who has spoken very regularly about kind of the kind of family atmosphere they have at Amazon, was personally very involved in the union busting effort. And through this NLRB here, and we also heard that this mailbox, which to me is really kind of the symbol of Amazon going much beyond anti-union propaganda, which again we see in a lot of these campaigns, to at some point having physical access to these ballots, which is just a level of shadiness that I think is pretty unusual. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, they have so much power. They are able to con the U.S. Postal Service into dropping a box in right there so that they could surveil and, as you said, have access to. But here's the thing, like you said, this is stuff that goes on all the time, the kind of harassment, the kind of captive audience meetings, the kind of, plastering, anti-union billboards everywhere, making it almost impossible for union organizers to have any access to the workers, to have some balance in messaging.
Right.
All of this stuff is perfectly legal. But
It's all
they went above and beyond that. What they spent, $200 million.
something like that. Yeah. I mean, which, when you think about what that is per worker, that is just extraordinary. And at the same time, when you think about that relative to their overall annual revenue, it's a drop in the bucket,
Right.
A drop in the bucket. And you compare that to, not to get too, inside baseball about this, but you compare that to what the kind of resources that even an international has to throw at a campaign. I mean, that's an annual budget for a big IU, So it just goes to show kind of the how tilted the field is against us. And I think, we talked about this last time, but I think the one thing that was really good about what happened in Bessemer and the amount of coverage that it got was just, folks like you who followed this stuff for years understand the extent to which this is just the toolkit. And A, that the law is tilted against workers, and B, that they're willing still to go beyond what's legal, But I actually don't think that most working people really understand the extent to which that's true, especially when you're talking about people under 45 or under 40. And so I think part of what this process has really helped illuminate, and there's been some really remarkable coverage, I think we've done a good job. There are folks at Vice that I want to shout out that have been really, following the story and breaking news and done a really incredible job, telling what, getting access to some of these NLRB rulings against Amazon and showing the pattern, as you named, kind of the toolkit that they use. And as we've seen, as we move into this next kind of battle in this war with Amazon in Staten Island, the tactics that they, first used and developed in some of these early fights in 2014 and 2015, now, that they really refined in Bessemer, that they were forced to kind of step up as the movement, sort of also improved and stepped up their tactics. Now they're going to continue using in Staten Island and other places. So, I think the one good thing that's come of it thus far is we've seen a lot of coverage, right? Like the fact that we're talking about it now, the fact that this hearing was able to generate as much coverage as it did, I think is a good sign in terms of what, the kind of understanding of the public has around how tilted things are. And it comes at a really great time in terms of the fight around the PRO Act, obviously, where actual individuals would be held accountable for some of these offenses where, $100,000 is a penny of a penny of a penny to Amazon. But for Dave Clark, you might think twice. And when you go down the food chain at your, local organizing effort, that kind of fine starts to really carry a real threat.
There's some teeth in it, a little bit.
Yeah.
It's not where I want to go. I'd like to see the PRO Act be a little bit more, a total repeal of Taft-Hartley is my goal. I want to go back to the original intent of the NLRA. To me, that's where we need to go because that worked. We built the most prosperous working class in the history of civilization during that time period. And thanks to our Republican friends, time and time again, Taft-Hartley forward, we've seen an erosion of the standard of living of the average American worker. And that has everything to do with policy decisions because Amazon spent $200 million to convince those people and to intimidate and threaten those people to vote against the union. Right.
And it meant nothing to them. That was just it was pissing in the ocean. So they had plenty more where that came from. There's a great a report that came out just recently about wage suppression and the role that policy played in this. I mean, I just think it's a growing realization, I think, even amongst kind of economists and political elites, that the story that you're telling is just the truth, right? For a long time, people wanted to talk about it in terms of technology or globalization was driving down wages. And I think it's become more and more clear that no, it was the loss of labor power.
It's what we've been saying on this show for 16 years.
Yeah.
The economists didn't come up with a word specifically for corporate power keeping down wages
Right.
for no reason if it didn't exist. And I always say it wrong. Something like monsopony is the word that they give it. And you go,
Right.
they wouldn't come up with a specific word that I can mispronounce if it
Right.
weren't actually happening.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely happening. And, I think we're at this really interesting moment where, I think a lot of people, we talked about this again last time, but, I think younger people are like, oh yeah, Taft-Hartley, let's go. Let's get rid of that. Let's go back. I mean, and even maybe even beyond that, right? But like part of the reason why I think Pro has generated so much activity and interest is that it would start to, begin to tip the scales. Working people would actually have the resources to continue that fight and continue moving the needle in that direction. And that would just be transformational.
So where do you see, going back to the NLRB stuff, because right now the NLRB is still, what is it, 3-1?
Yeah.
You have
Right.
the one woman who's the chairwoman, who's the only Democrat. So it's going to take a while for this to turn around. Even if Amazon's found guilty of all these stuffs, the penalty basically is don't do it again. Post a notice, say you're sorry, and that's it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think I don't want to pretend to know what the RWDSU folks are thinking in terms of their next campaign. As I'm sure you're aware, Teamsters have taken a crack at this as well in other places. So
yeah, because if they don't, UPS is done.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, I mean, I think there are probably a lot of, internationals that are looking at different parts of, because I mean, that's the other thing about Amazon that's so remarkable is that they touch so many industries, right? There's a conglomerate in it, they're one of the biggest players across so many different sectors of the economy. Yep. So, workers in all those different industries have to be concerned about the impact that Amazon is having on, either their already unionized workforce or others, who they wish to organize.
No, so, and the argument comes down to, are they workers or not? I mean, that's what the real Amazon fight is going to be in the coming years, and I'm sure something you guys are going to be covering. And look, I think you guys have been doing fabulous work. I hope folks will check out your work at perfectunion.us. Also follow you on Twitter at moreperfectus. I'm a big fan. I hope you'll come back and share some more with us as this continues down the road. Anytime.
It's always a pleasure. Thanks for everything you do, man.
Good stuff, Max. I appreciate your time. Max Berger, editorial director there at More Perfect Union. Seriously, check out their stuff, moreperfectunion.us. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.